Good morning, fellow citizens of Period 2, Mrs. Morocco's class. I am here today with my advisors, Ben McHenry, Jacob Kiesel, and River Capek. We are here today to talk about the last major battle of World War II, the Battle of Okinawa, and mainly Hacksaw Ridge, which happened in 1945.
Before we talk about the amazing battle at Hacksaw Ridge, we must understand the history leading up to it. The battle, fought between the United States and Japan, was a part of World War II's Pacific Theater. World War II was inevitable, with the Germans expanding and the constant increasing tensions in the world. Germany militarized while everyone else agreed not to because of the tragedy of World War I. The fight happened in the Battle of Okinawa, part of the operation codenamed Operation Iceberg. It was fought on the island by the United States Army and the Marine Corps against the Imperial Japanese Army. While the plan for the United States was to be neutral in the war, it was clear that we had to engage after the conflict in Pearl Harbor's bombing, which was a personal attack on the nation by the Japanese aiming to expand their sphere of influence in the Pacific Theater.
The American troops first began landing on the western coast of the island on the shore of Chitan on April 1st, 1945. They began to attack towards the south with the goal of reaching Shuri Castle, where the Japanese force was headquartered. Before they arrived at Hacksaw Ridge, brutal battles occurred at the Kakazu Escarpment. After bypassing the Japanese defenses there, the Americans were able to move to the more heavily fortified Medea Escarpment, located atop a 400-foot vertical cliff. Though the Americans had large numbers, they were still at a disadvantage due to their lower position. The attack on the ridge began on April 26th. To defend the position, Japanese troops hunkered down in a network of caves and dugouts. Much of the fighting was ruthless hand-to-hand combat. The Japanese were determined to hold the ridge, as it was the last fortification between the American Army and the Japanese headquarters in Shuri.
Throughout the Battle of Okinawa, there were many significant battle strategies that were used and developed. Two strategies that the Japanese utilized were using the terrain to slow down the American advance, as well as using 2,000 suicide attacks. They also used tunnels and underground tactics in order to fight against the Americans. While these tactics proved to be effective, they did not stop the Americans from defeating the Japanese. The Battle of Okinawa lasted 3 months and was one of the deadliest battles ever recorded, with 50,000 American casualties out of the 60,000 Americans that fought. The Japanese side also suffered heavy losses, such as 110,000 Japanese soldiers and 150,000 Okinawa citizens. The Japanese also fought with the motto, "Suicide or surrender." They believed that the Americans took no prisoners, so instead of surrendering, many took their own lives.
While much of the fighting during the Battle of Okinawa did take place on land, there were some naval fighting close to the shores. The most well-known example is when Japan's battleship Yamato was sent to launch a surprise attack on the United States Fifth Fleet. But Allied submarines spotted the Yamato and alerted the fleet, who then launched an airborne attack. The ship was bombarded and sunk along with most of its crew. The US were not the only ones launching attacks from the air, though. Perhaps Japan's most ruthless weapon of the battle were the kamikaze suicide pilots. On April 4th, the Japanese unleashed these well-trained pilots on the Fifth Fleet. Some dove their planes into ships at more than 500 miles per hour, causing catastrophic damage. American sailors tried desperately to shoot the kamikaze planes down, but were often sitting ducks against the enemy pilots dive-bombing from the clouds. By the end of the Battle of Okinawa, the United States Naval Fifth Fleet suffered 36 sunken ships and another 168 damaged.
One of the most praised heroes of this battle was a young man by the name of Desmond Doss. As a young boy, Doss grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. One day, he was fighting with his brother, Harold, who had also fought in World War II, and ended up hitting Harold in the head with a heavy object, injuring him. From that day on, this event traumatized him, and he vowed to never touch a gun again, and became very religious and a pacifist, and he did not believe in violence. His beliefs and job as a defense industry worker provided him an exemption from the war draft, but he deferred this offer because he still wanted to serve his country. To pursue this, he enrolled in the Army Medical Corps as a non-combatant. Unfortunately, many of his fellow recruits threatened and harassed him by beating him every day, never befriending him, throwing shoes at him while he was praying, and even trying to get him out of their unit, just because he wouldn't touch a gun. Doss was a part of the 307th Infantry and the 77th Infantry Division. In April of 1945, Desmond Doss and the rest of his infantry were called upon to fight near Uraso, Okinawa. Doss and his fellow recruits had to climb the 400-foot-tall cliff where thousands of Japanese soldiers were waiting, hidden in caves and holes. After about a week of fighting, Doss was the only medic left on the ridge. The Japanese had driven the Americans back down the cliff, but Doss stayed, tending to the wounded. Doss snuck around in the Japanese-infested land alone, without a weapon, rescuing injured men who had been left behind. He would bring them to the ridge, where he would lower them down a 400-foot cliff with a rope, saving 75 men, and after every rescue, he would say the famous quote, "Dear God, let me get just one more man." During this time, Doss was hit by a sniper's bolt and a grenade, shattering in his arm and leg, and everyone assumed that he was dead, because they had not seen him for days. Little did they know that Doss was still on the hill, tending to the wounded men. In fact, Doss was in his second campaign at Okinawa, and his men refused to go up the cliff unless Doss agreed to go as well.
After the Americans took the Shuri Line, General Ushijima and General Cho realized that further fighting was futile. They both committed ritual suicide on June 22nd, effectively ending the Battle of Okinawa. Both sides suffered colossal losses, with 49,000 American casualties and an even larger 110,000 for the Japanese. It is also estimated that between 40,000 and 150,000 Okinawa citizens were killed. The battle is considered one of the deadliest of the war due to this. Taking Okinawa put Allied forces within striking distance of Japan, with the island only being around 400 miles from the mainland. But wanting to bring the war to a swift end, and knowing that over 2 million Japanese troops were awaiting on the mainland, President Truman chose to drop an atomic bomb on Hiroshima on August 6th. Japan didn't surrender immediately, so Truman ordered the bombing of Nagasaki on August 9th. Finally, on August 14, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, marking VJ Day, the end of World War II in the Pacific Theater.